That morning felt ordinary until Daniel pulled up beside me. He leaned slightly out of the car window, flashing a confident smile that seemed almost rehearsed. "If you don't mind," he said, his tone casual yet inviting, "let's go for a little outing today." For a moment I hesitated. My brother's friend had always been polite, someone I had only seen around the house during visits, never someone I imagined spending time with alone. Yet there was something disarming in the way he asked, as if the day itself had been waiting for this invitation. I surprised myself when I replied, "Yes, let's go." And with that, I stepped into his car, unknowingly stepping into a memory that would stay with me far longer than I ever expected. The city streets faded quickly behind us, replaced by winding roads and patches of greenery that looked brighter than usual in the sunlight. The air smelled fresher the further we drove, and I could feel the rhythm of everyday life slipping away. Daniel kept the conversation light, joking about small things, teasing me just enough to make me laugh without crossing any obvious lines. I remember the way his voice filled the space between us, not too loud, not too soft, just enough to keep me listening. He spoke about travel, about places he wanted to see, and somehow, without realizing it, I found myself telling him about dreams I had never voiced out loud before. As the car climbed higher into the hills, the scenery changed. Wide stretches of road curved along mountainsides, revealing valleys below that looked like they belonged in someone else's life. It was beautiful, so beautiful that for a moment I forgot who I was with and simply admired the view. Daniel noticed my awe and smiled, almost as if he had planned this effect all along. "Sometimes," he said, his eyes fixed on the road, "you need to escape to remember that life is more than just routine." I didn't answer immediately, but his words lingered, weaving into the moment like a thread I couldn't pull away from. We stopped at a small clearing where the mountains opened wide, and the air felt untouched by the noise of the world. Getting out of the car, I stretched and let the cool breeze brush over me. Daniel leaned against the hood casually, watching me more than the view. That realization made me both nervous and strangely warm inside. I tried to focus on the horizon, the way the sunlight dipped across the slopes, but I couldn't ignore his presence. He carried himself with an ease that made me want to stay a little longer than I should have. We talked for what felt like hours but was probably less than one. About childhood memories, about choices, about things neither of us had said to anyone else. It was strange how quickly walls broke down when there was no one else around, no expectations, no watchful eyes. At one point he laughed softly and said, "You're different, Emily. Most people don't listen this way." I smiled, pretending his words didn't stir something inside me, but deep down I knew they did. Compliments can be dangerous when they come from the wrong person at the right time. When the wind picked up and clouds began to roll in, we decided to head back. The drive down felt slower, though maybe that was just me wishing it would last a little longer. Daniel kept glancing at me, not in a way that was obvious enough to confront, but just enough that I could sense it. Every time his eyes lingered, I felt the pull of something I wasn't ready to name. I tried distracting myself by talking about my brother, about how busy his life had become, about how I sometimes felt invisible in my own home. Daniel listened with an attentiveness that made me feel exposed yet comforted at the same time. By the time we reached the city again, I thought the day was over, that we would part ways with a polite goodbye. But instead of dropping me off, Daniel suggested we stop by his office. "Just for a bit," he said casually, though his tone carried a weight that made me wonder what exactly he meant. I agreed, not because I had to, but because part of me didn't want the day to end. Sitting beside him as the car wove back into familiar streets, I realized how far we had come from where we started. It wasn't just the distance between the city and the mountains, it was the space between who I thought I was that morning and who I felt myself becoming now. There was a quiet shift inside me, a sense that I had crossed an invisible line without even noticing. When we finally pulled up near his office, the sun was beginning to set, painting the buildings in shades of gold and orange. I looked out the window, searching for words, but none seemed right. Daniel didn't rush me. He simply turned off the engine, leaned back, and let the silence stretch between us. That silence said more than any conversation could. It was heavy, charged, and filled with possibilities I wasn't ready to face, that I stepped out of the car with him, my footsteps echoing softly against the pavement. Something about the moment felt suspended, as if time itself had slowed down to see what choice I would make. I told myself we were just two people who happened to spend a day together, but deep down I knew this wasn't ordinary. Something had begun, something neither of us had planned, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the rest of the story was already waiting for us just beyond the door. The return drive felt different from the journey up to the mountains. The silence between us was no longer the silence of strangers, it was the silence of two people who had already shared too much in too little time. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, pretending to look out the window, though my attention kept slipping back to the man beside me. Daniel drove calmly, but every now and then his fingers tapped lightly against the steering wheel as if his thoughts were racing faster than the car. That he broke the silence first with a simple observation. "You seem quiet now." His tone wasn't questioning, more like he was gently reaching out, trying to keep me anchored to him. I smiled faintly, answering, "I'm just thinking." He didn't press further, but I could feel the way his eyes lingered on me for an extra second before returning to the road. The city grew closer, familiar buildings replacing the wide-open views of the hills. I expected him to take the usual turn toward my neighborhood, to drop me off so we could each pretend this day never happened. Instead, he kept driving straight. I glanced at him, a small question forming in my eyes. He caught it immediately. "I have a few things to finish at the office," he said casually. "Why don't you come along for a bit?" "It won't take long." I should have declined. I should have laughed politely, said I was tired, and asked him to take me home. But instead, the words that slipped out of my mouth were, "Sure, I don't mind." And just like that, another small line was crossed. His office was quiet when we arrived, almost too quiet. The building was tall but mostly empty at that hour, the kind of silence that makes every footstep sound louder than it should. As we walked down the hallway, I felt strangely exposed, as though the walls themselves were witnesses to something that hadn't even happened yet. Daniel unlocked the door to his workspace, and the click of the lock echoed in the stillness. Inside, the office was simple, neat, and warm in a way I didn't expect. Papers stacked neatly, a desk lamp glowing softly in the corner, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. Daniel gestured toward a chair, and I sat down, trying to act normal, though my heart beat faster than it should. He moved around the room with practiced ease, gathering a few files, checking something on his computer, but I could sense his attention kept drifting back to me. At one point, he stopped what he was doing and leaned against the edge of the desk, studying me with that same calm intensity he'd shown earlier. "You know," he said softly, "I didn't plan this today. But I'm glad it happened." I looked down at my hands, unsure how to respond. His words were simple, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I tried to laugh lightly, saying, "It's just an outing. Nothing more." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying to myself. He didn't argue. Instead, he walked over slowly, stopping just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. He didn't touch me, not yet, but the closeness alone sent a shiver through me. My breath caught in my throat, and I told myself I should stand, should move, should put distance between us. But I didn't. His voice dropped lower, softer. "Emily, have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life? Like everything you do is just expected of you?" I froze, because his words mirrored thoughts I had never spoken aloud. I nodded slowly. "All the time," I whispered. And in that moment, it felt like he saw me, not the version of me everyone else knew, but the one hidden beneath layers of routine and silence. The conversation deepened, spilling into places I hadn't expected. I told him things I hadn't even admitted to myself, how often I felt invisible, how often I wondered if anyone really noticed me. Daniel listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving mine. The more I spoke, the lighter I felt, as though sharing my secrets gave me permission to breathe again. And then, somewhere between one confession and the next, his hand brushed lightly against mine. It was the smallest gesture, almost accidental, but it was enough to change everything. My breath hitched, my heart raced, and for a moment I forgot where I was. He didn't pull away, and neither did I. The room seemed to shrink around us, silence pressing in, broken only by the faint hum of the desk lamp. I felt the weight of the moment building, each second pulling us closer to something we both knew we shouldn't allow. His fingers intertwined with mine, gently but firmly, and I looked up to find his gaze locked on me. I should have spoken, should have said something to break the spell. But instead, I sat frozen in that charged stillness, unable to move, unwilling to. The air between us grew heavier, filled with unspoken words and unasked questions. When he finally leaned closer, his face just inches from mine, the world outside ceased to exist. My thoughts scattered, leaving only the pounding of my heart and the undeniable pull of the moment. He didn't rush, didn't force, he simply waited, giving me the choice. And though every rational part of me screamed to stop, my silence became its own answer. What happened next isn't something I can describe in detail, not because I don't remember, but because some moments aren't meant to be spelled out. They live in gestures, in glances, in the quiet surrender to a feeling too strong to resist. It wasn't loud or hurried, it was slow, inevitable, like two paths crossing in a place where they were never supposed to meet. When it was over, the silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of strangers or even of friends. It was the silence of two people who had crossed a line that could never be erased. I sat there, still catching my breath, the weight of what had just happened settling into my chest. Daniel didn't say anything at first. He simply sat beside me, his hand still holding mine, as if he knew words would only cheapen the moment, but inside me, a storm had begun. Excitement, fear, guilt, all tangled together in a way I couldn't untangle. I knew what this meant. I knew the risks, the consequences, the lies I would now carry. And yet, part of me couldn't bring myself to regret it. Not yet. When I finally stood to leave, Daniel didn't stop me. He only said quietly, "Emily, this doesn't have to end here." His words followed me out of the office, clinging to me long after I stepped back into the cool night air, and as I walked away, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I could never go back to who I was that morning. Something had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after, Sophia woke with a heaviness she couldn't shake. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating the quiet order of her bedroom. Michael was already gone, no doubt rushing to his office as always, leaving behind nothing more than the faint scent of his cologne on the sheets. The house looked the same, but inside her everything had shifted. She lay still for a long time, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments by the river with Derek. The thrill, the danger, the way he had touched her as though he knew her hidden hunger, it haunted her. At work, she found it hard to focus. Reports blurred before her eyes, conversations drifted past without meaning. She was haunted by two truths: one, that she had betrayed her vows, and two, that she didn't regret it as much as she should. That contradiction ate at her. Every time she looked in the mirror, she didn't just see an officer or a wife, she saw a woman tangled in a secret she could never confess. Derek didn't stay away. A week later, she saw him again, waiting near the edge of her neighborhood as though he belonged there. She told herself she wouldn't stop, wouldn't look, wouldn't give him any more power over her. Yet when their eyes met, she slowed. The pull was undeniable, reckless but intoxicating. They met again in stolen hours, sometimes in her car, sometimes in quiet places away from prying eyes. Their conversations carried both fire and danger. Derek spoke about starting fresh, about being more than the mistakes he had made. He spoke to her not as a thief or a stranger, but as a man who saw her loneliness and filled it. Every moment with him reminded her how starved she had been for attention, for intimacy, for someone to truly notice her, but each meeting also deepened the weight of guilt pressing on her. At home, she grew more distant from Michael. She avoided his eyes at dinner, avoided his touch in bed. When he finally asked, "Are you okay?" she forced a smile and muttered something about stress at work. He accepted it too easily, and that hurt her more than anything. If he had pressed harder, if he had looked closer, maybe she would have confessed, maybe she would have stopped. But his detachment gave her both the space and the excuse to keep slipping further into secrecy. One evening, after meeting Derek, Sophia drove home with tears in her eyes. She parked in the driveway and sat in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She couldn't deny what had happened anymore. It wasn't just temptation, it had become an affair, a betrayal of everything she had once promised. The lines between right and wrong blurred more each day, but the weight of it was crushing her. Derek, too, began to push boundaries. One night, as they sat together, he asked, "What if you left him? What if you and I started over somewhere else?" Sophia froze, his words slicing through the fragile bubble they had created. "Don't say that," she whispered. "Why not?" he asked. "You're not happy. You can't tell me you are." "I'm married," she snapped, the word sharp in her mouth. "I have a life, a name, a career. This is just," she stopped herself before finishing the sentence, because she didn't know what this was anymore. A fling? A rebellion? Or something far more dangerous? Derek leaned closer, his voice softer now. "You deserve more than half a marriage and an empty bed." The truth of his words made her heart ache, but it also terrified her. She pulled away, started the car, and drove him back to the edge of the city. They didn't speak during the ride. When he stepped out, he looked at her one last time, a mixture of longing and warning in his eyes. "Decide what you really want, Sophia. Because living in between will destroy you." That night, she couldn't sleep. Michael stirred beside her, oblivious to the storm raging inside his wife. Sophia lay awake, staring into the dark, realizing that her life had split into two irreconcilable worlds. One with Michael, stable but loveless. One with Derek, dangerous but alive. And in trying to hold on to both, she was losing herself. Days passed. She ignored Derek's calls, telling herself she needed to end it. She threw herself into work, stayed late at the precinct, avoided her husband's questions with vague excuses. Yet every quiet moment brought his memory back. The way he had touched her hand. The way he had said her name. The way he had made her feel visible again. Finally, she agreed to see him one last time. They met at the same spot by the river, the city lights shimmering on the water just as they had the first night. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. "I can't do this anymore," Sophia said, her voice breaking. Derek's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I knew this was coming. I have too much to lose," she whispered. "My career, my marriage, even if it's broken, it's still my life." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled sadly. "You don't have to explain. I just hope someday, you stop starving yourself." Tears stung her eyes as he walked away into the darkness, his figure swallowed by the night. She stood there long after he was gone, the river whispering softly against the shore. When she returned home, Michael was waiting in the kitchen, sipping coffee. He glanced up, barely curious, and said, "You're late again." Sophia forced a smile, her heart aching with secrets she could never tell. She sat across from him, watching the man she had once loved, wondering if he would ever notice how much of her had already drifted away. From that night forward, she buried the memory of Derek deep within herself. It became a hidden scar, a reminder of the line she had crossed and the choices she could never undo. To the world, she remained Officer Sophia Miller, wife of Michael Carter, protector of the law. But inside, she carried the weight of a story no one would ever know, a story of temptation, betrayal, and a fleeting taste of love that had changed her forever.